7 years had passed since Latifah Al Maktoum vanished into the endless dunes of Dubai's empty quarter. The case had gone cold. Search helicopters withdrew, headlines faded, and her name became just another whisper carried by the desert wind. But some secrets refused to stay buried beneath the sand. In 2023, a discovery changed everything. Hikers exploring the dunes near Liwa Oasis stumbled upon skeletal remains, and beside them, a bracelet engraved with one haunting word: Latifah. For Sheikha Mariam Al Maktoum, a mother's worst nightmare was finally confirmed. What had been mourned as a tragic accident was now revealed as something far more sinister, a betrayal so calculated, so cold, it would shake Dubai's golden facade to its core. Welcome to True Crime Journal HQ. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily update on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Dubai, 2014. At 34, Latifah Al Maktoum had built a life that seemed touched by both talent and grace. As one of the UAE's most respected architects, she had earned her reputation designing sustainable housing projects that merged tradition with innovation. Her work appeared in international design magazines. Government officials sought her expertise. Colleagues admired not just her vision, but her quiet humility, the way she mentored younger designers, especially women, encouraging them to claim space in a male-dominated field. But despite her professional triumphs, Latifah's greatest pride was simpler, more personal. She had found love, or so she believed, with Khalid Al Nuaimi, a charismatic entrepreneur whose construction firm had become synonymous with Dubai's relentless skyward ambition. Together they were the city's golden couple. Her creativity, his charm, her discipline, his confidence. They dined at the finest restaurants, vacationed in the Maldives, and spoke of building a future together. Marble villas, children's laughter, a legacy that would outlast the desert winds. What Latifah didn't know was that the man who held her hand at charity galas and kissed her forehead at dawn was slowly drowning beneath a surface of lies. Khalid's empire wasn't rising, it was crumbling. Behind closed doors, his construction firm, Al Nuaimi Developments, was collapsing under the weight of a failed high-rise project in Jumeirah. Investors were pulling out, creditors were circling, and with each passing month, Khalid's desperation deepened not into honesty, but into something far more dangerous. Latifah had been raised to believe in resilience and integrity. Her late father, a prominent Emirati businessman, had taught her that success without honor was hollow. Her mother, Sheikha Mariam, had instilled in her the values of loyalty, family, and faith. Latifah carried these lessons like heirlooms, never imagining they would blind her to the truth, that the man she loved had begun to see her not as a partner, but as a solution to his financial ruin. And when Latifah discovered she was pregnant in early 2016, her world finally felt complete. She envisioned a family, a home filled with warmth and purpose, a child who would inherit not just wealth but values, kindness, creativity, strength. But for Khalid, that pregnancy wasn't a blessing. It was a problem that threatened to expose his mounting debts, his hidden failures, and the affair he'd been concealing for over a year with the one woman Latifah trusted most in the world, her best friend, Hessa Al-Qasimi. To understand how a love story turned into a murder plot, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment Latifah and Khalid met, and the slow, insidious cracks that formed beneath their picture-perfect marriage. They met in the winter of 2012 at a Dubai Business Forum reception held in the glittering ballroom of the Burj Al Arab. Latifah had been invited to speak on a panel about sustainable architecture in arid climates. Khalid was there networking, champagne in hand, working the room with the ease of a man who knew how to make people feel important. When he approached her after her speech, his opening line wasn't a compliment, it was a question. Do you really believe Dubai can sustain green development, or is it just good marketing? His eyes held genuine curiosity, not cynicism. Latifah appreciated that. They talked for 2 hours, long after the event had emptied. By the time they exchanged numbers, she had felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Khalid pursued her with romantic intensity, handwritten notes left at her office, surprise weekend trips to Masandam, candlelit dinners overlooking the Palm Jumeirah. He listened when she spoke about her work, asked thoughtful questions, and celebrated every contract she won as if it were his own victory. When he proposed a year later beneath the stars at a private desert camp, Latifah said yes without hesitation. To the outside world, they were flawless. Photographers captured them at charity galas. Their names appeared side by side in business magazines, and friends spoke enviously of their marriage. Latifah designed their penthouse apartment in Dubai Marina, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Arabian Gulf. Khalid filled it with Italian furniture and expensive art. They hosted dinner parties where laughter echoed late into the night, where Latifah's humility softened Khalid's swagger, where everything seemed golden. But beneath the surface, hairline fractures had begun to form. Khalid grew evasive about finances. When Latifah asked casual questions about his projects, "How's the Jumeirah Tower coming along?" he deflected with vague optimism or changed the subject entirely. Business calls that once filled him with energy now left him irritable, sometimes furious. He'd disappear into his home office for hours, door locked, voice raised behind closed walls. When she offered to help, suggesting her firm could collaborate on troubled projects, he smiled tightly and told her not to worry. "You focus on your work, Habibti. I'll handle mine." The distance grew slowly, imperceptibly like sand shifting beneath her feet. Latifah confided only in Hessa al-Qasimi, her closest friend since their university days at the American University of Sharjah. Hessa had been there through everything. Latifah's father's death, her early career struggles, her wedding day. Over coffee at their favorite cafe in City Walk, Latifah would voice her concerns. "He's under so much pressure lately. I don't know how to reach him." Hessa always reassured her. "Marriage has seasons, Latifah. This is just a rough patch. Khalid loves you. Anyone can see that." She'd reach across the table, squeeze Latifah's hand, and smile with such warmth that Latifah's doubts would momentarily dissolve. What Latifah didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that Hessa's reassurances were laced with poison. That behind her sympathetic smiles, envy had been festering for years, and that Khalid's distance wasn't stress. It was calculation. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. Khalid al-Nuaimi had learned early in life that perception was currency. In Dubai, a city built on ambition and appearances, the man who looked successful often became successful. But by late 2014, Khalid's carefully constructed image had begun to crack, and beneath it, there was nothing but debt and desperation. The Jumeirah Towers project his flagship development. The one that was supposed to cement his reputation had become his nightmare. What started as a visionary luxury high-rise had devolved into a bureaucratic disaster. Permits stalled. Construction costs ballooned. Key investors, sensing trouble, quietly withdrew their capital. By the time Khalid realized the project was unsalvageable, he was already millions of dirhams in debt. He hid it masterfully. In public, he was still the charismatic entrepreneur, tailored suits, confident handshake, that practiced smile that made people believe in him. But in private, the mask slipped. Late-night calls with creditors turned ugly. He mortgaged properties he didn't own outright, forged documents to secure short-term loans, and shuffled money between accounts like a man playing chess against time itself. It still wasn't enough. And then there was Latifah. While Khalid's empire crumbled in secret, his wife's star only rose higher. Her firm secured a landmark contract with the UAE government to design eco-friendly housing for desert communities, a project worth 30 million dirhams. Architectural Digest featured her in a 6-page spread. At social events, people gravitated toward her, asking about her work, her vision, her future. Khalid stood beside her, nodding politely, feeling smaller with each compliment she received. He told himself it wasn't jealousy. He told himself he was proud of her. But late at night, alone with his failures, the resentment festered. She had everything: talent, respect, her late father's inheritance sitting untouched in investment accounts, while he scrambled to keep his business from collapsing entirely. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you made it to this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who is still watching. If you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe, and share it with your loved ones to protect them from the same tragedy happening to them in the future. It was Hessa who first noticed his unraveling. They ran into each other at a business lunch in DIFC, Khalid nursing his third espresso, Hessa between meetings. She asked how he was. Really asked, not the performative way others did. And for the first time in months, Khalid let his guard slip. "Honestly, I'm drowning." Hessa didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't tell him it would get better. Instead, she said, "I know exactly what you mean." They began meeting regularly, ostensibly as friends. Two people orbiting Latifah's life, who understood the pressure of living in someone else's shadow. Khalid vented about investors, contracts, the weight of expectation. Hessa spoke carefully about her own envy, how she'd always been second to Latifah, second in university rankings, second in career recognition, always the talented friend, but never the star. What started as commiseration evolved into something darker. Shared resentment became shared fantasy. Coffee meetings turned into afternoon drinks at private lounges. And somewhere between the third glass of wine and the fourth deflection of guilt, they crossed a line neither could uncross. Khalid found comfort in Hessa not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she didn't judge his failures. She didn't remind him of what he could have been. She reminded him of what he wanted to become, and for that, he would do anything. The first time they kissed, it was in the parking garage of the Armani Hotel. Khalid had just finished another disastrous meeting with his bank. Hessa had texted him, "Are you okay?" and he'd asked her to meet him. When she arrived, he was leaning against his Range Rover, tie loosened, looking defeated in a way Latifah never saw. Hessa didn't ask questions. She simply stepped close, placed her hand on his chest, and said, "You don't have to pretend with me." The kiss that followed wasn't romantic. It was desperate, two people seeking refuge from their own inadequacies in each other's arms. After that, the affair became routine. They met at private villas Khalid rented under shell companies, places with no security cameras, no staff, no witnesses. Hessa would arrive first, always careful, always calculating. Khalid would follow 20 minutes later. They'd spend afternoons tangled in hotel sheets, convincing themselves that what they were doing wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Hessa had spent her entire life being compared to Latifah. In university, Latifah's thesis won awards while Hessa's was merely commended. In their careers, Latifah's name opened doors while Hessa worked twice as hard for half the recognition. Even their friendship felt unequal. Latifah, the gracious star; Hessa, the loyal sidekick. The resentment had been building for years, a slow poison she'd learned to swallow with a smile. Khalid gave her permission to stop smiling. "She doesn't see you," he'd whisper, his fingers tracing patterns on her skin. "Latifah thinks the world revolves around her vision, her projects, her legacy. She doesn't see what she has, doesn't appreciate it." "She doesn't appreciate you," Hessa would reply, feeding his ego the way Latifah no longer did. They built a shared delusion, brick by brick. They weren't the villains, they were the misunderstood. Latifah wasn't the victim, she was the obstacle. Their coded messages grew bolder. "Can't stop thinking about yesterday. We deserve this happiness. Imagine if things were different." Different. The word hung between them like a question waiting to be answered. And then, in February 2016, Latifah announced she was pregnant. She told Khalid over breakfast, her face radiant with joy, her hand instinctively resting on her still flat stomach. "We're going to be parents, Habibi. Can you believe it?" She was already planning nursery colors, baby names, her maternity leave. She spoke of legacy, of raising a child who would inherit not just wealth but values. Khalid smiled. He said all the right things. He even embraced her, felt her heart beating with excitement against his chest. But inside, something cold and calculating had already begun to turn. A baby meant an heir. An heir meant Latifah would redraft her will, redirect her inheritance, create legal protections Khalid couldn't touch. The fortune he'd been counting on, the 50 million dirhams in investment accounts from her late father, the properties, the business equity, would become untouchable, locked away for a child he never wanted. That night, Khalid met Hessa at their usual villa in Arabian Ranches. "She's pregnant," he said flatly. Hessa's expression shifted surprise, then something darker. "What are you going to do?" Khalid poured himself a drink, stared out at the desert night, and said the words that would seal Latifah's fate. "I don't know, but this changes everything." Hessa moved beside him, her voice soft but deliberate. "You know what has to happen, Khalid, before the child arrives, before she changes her will." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Khalid made the suggestion casually, over dinner at their favorite restaurant overlooking the marina. "Let's get away for the weekend," he said, reaching across the table to take Latifah's hand. "Just us. No work, no phones, no distractions. We should celebrate properly, you, me, and our little one." Latifah's face lit up. She'd been hoping Khalid would embrace the pregnancy with more enthusiasm. This felt like the husband she'd fallen in love with, romantic, thoughtful, present. "Where were you thinking?" "The empty quarter," he said smoothly. "We'll camp under the stars, like we used to talk about. You've been working so hard, Habibti. You deserve some peace before everything changes. She squeezed his hand, tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. That sounds perfect. They left early Friday morning, March 18th, 2016. Latifah wore a flowing white abaya, her pregnancy just beginning to show. Khalid loaded their yellow tent into the back of his black Range Rover, the same tent they'd bought years ago but never used, still pristine in its packaging. Camping gear, coolers packed with food, blankets, lanterns. To anyone watching, they looked like any couple seeking adventure and intimacy. Latifah posted a photo to Instagram before they left, the two of them standing beside the SUV, Khalid's arm around her shoulders, her hand on her belly. The caption read, "Off-grid for the weekend. Just us and the desert." The drive out of Dubai was breathtaking. The city's glass towers gave way to flat highways, then to endless dunes painted gold by the morning sun. Latifah rolled down her window, letting the warm air tangle her hair. They listened to Fairuz on the radio, singing along off-key, laughing at their own terrible Arabic pronunciation. For a few hours, it felt like the early days when love felt simple and the future felt certain. Khalid's phone buzzed repeatedly. He ignored most messages, but one made him glance down briefly. It was from Hessa. "You know what has to happen before the child arrives." He deleted it without responding. "Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you made it to this point, drop a comment with 'I'm still here.' Let's see who is still watching. If you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe, and share it with your loved ones to protect them from the same tragedy happening to them in the future." By late afternoon, they reached their destination, a vast, isolated stretch of the Rub al Khali, hours from any road, any town, any witness. The sand stretched endlessly in every direction, sculpted by wind into waves frozen in time. Khalid parked near a cluster of low dunes. Together they unpacked the tent, struggling briefly with the poles before laughing their way through the setup. Latifah arranged blankets inside while Khalid built a small fire pit. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, they sat side by side on a woven rug, watching the horizon swallow the light. "It's so quiet here," Latifah whispered, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "I can hear my own heartbeat." Khalid stared at the fire, his jaw tight. "Yeah, quiet." Above them, stars began to emerge, thousands of them, scattered across the velvet dark like diamonds on black silk. The desert night was perfect, almost sacred in its beauty. Latifah felt safe, loved, hopeful. She had no idea she was sitting beside the man who had already decided she wouldn't see another sunrise. The sandstorm arrived just before dawn, swallowing the horizon in a wall of rust-colored fury. Or at least, that's what Khalid told authorities when he stumbled into a police station in Liwa Oasis at 9:47 a.m., covered in dust, eyes wild with panic. "My wife, she's gone. Our car broke down. She went to find help. I tried to stop her, but the storm..." His voice cracked convincingly. "Please, you have to find her. She's pregnant." Within hours, the search operation mobilized. Helicopters circled the empty quarter, their blades cutting through air thick with sand. Ground teams in 4x4s combed the dunes, following GPS coordinates Khalid provided. Thermal imaging scanned for heat signatures. Search dogs lost scent trails in the shifting sand. But Latifah Al Maktoum had vanished as completely as if the desert had swallowed her whole. The media descended like vultures. By evening, Khalid's face was on every news channel: Al Arabiya, Sky News Arabia, CNN International. He sat in front of cameras, his voice breaking, his hands trembling. "Latifah is everything to me. We were celebrating our future, our baby. If anyone has seen her, if anyone knows anything, please." The performance was flawless. Dubai mourned. Social media filled with Find Latifah posts. Her architectural firm released a statement offering a reward. Sheikha Mariam, Latifah's mother, made tearful pleas on television, begging the desert to return her daughter. Hessa Al-Qasimi stood beside Khalid through it all, at the police briefings, at the makeshift memorial outside Latifah's office, at the vigil held in Zabil Park. She wore black, her face a mask of grief, her hand occasionally resting on Khalid's shoulder in a gesture that read, "As friendship, nothing more." "Latifah was like a sister to me," she told reporters, her voice thick with emotion. "Khalid, stay strong, we'll find her." Behind closed doors, their messages told a different story. "You did what you had to do. No one suspects anything. We just have to wait. After 2 weeks, the official search scaled back. After a month, it quietly ended. The desert, authorities said, had claimed another victim tragic, but not uncommon. People got disoriented, dehydrated, lost. The empty quarter was unforgiving. Khalid wasted no time. 6 weeks after Latifah's disappearance, he filed a petition to have her declared legally dead, citing the lack of evidence that she survived. By law, it would take 7 years, but insurance companies operated differently. The 5 million dirham policy he'd taken out on Latifah just months before her disappearance had a clause for presumed death in extreme circumstances. His lawyers worked quietly, efficiently. Within 3 months, the payout was approved. Khalid's debts evaporated overnight. Al-Nuaimi Developments was saved. He sold their marina penthouse, citing painful memories, and moved to a new villa in Abu Dhabi, purchased under an LLC that listed Hessa Al-Qasimi as co-owner. To their friends, they were grieving survivors finding solace in each other's company. To the world, Latifah became a cautionary tale, another name added to the long list of people claimed by the desert's indifference. But in the sand, beneath layers of time and wind, the truth waited. And the desert, as Sheikha Mariam often said, remembers everything. By 2017, Khalid and Hessa had built a new life in Abu Dhabi, far enough from Dubai's gossip circuits to avoid uncomfortable questions. They purchased a villa in Saadiyat Island, modern, sterile, nothing like the home Khalid had shared with Latifah. To neighbors and business associates, they were partners in a boutique real estate consultancy. To each other, they were survivors of a secret that bound them tighter than any marriage certificate ever could. But guilt, they learned, doesn't disappear with distance. Khalid changed. The charming entrepreneur who once commanded rooms with confidence now drank whiskey alone on their balcony, staring at the darkened sea. He grew paranoid, jumping at unexpected phone calls, obsessively checking news reports for any mention of Latifah's case. Some nights, Hessa would wake to find him standing in the doorway, his face pale, whispering, "I heard something in the sand." "There's nothing there," she'd tell him, her voice sharp. "Go back to sleep." But Khalid couldn't sleep. Not really. Not anymore. Hessa handled the guilt differently. She buried it beneath layers of control, managing their finances, dictating their social calendar, monitoring Khalid's every movement. What had begun as partnership calcified into surveillance. She checked his phone, questioned his whereabouts, ensured he never strayed from the script they'd constructed. Her love, once born of shared resentment, had twisted into something darker. The fear that he might break, might confess, might destroy them both. "We did what we had to do," she'd remind him during his worst moments. She was in the way. We chose survival. He'd nod, pour another drink, and try to believe her. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you made it to this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here. Let's see who is still watching." If you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe, and share it with your loved ones to protect them from the same tragedy happening to them in the future. Meanwhile, 140 kilometers south, Sheikha Mariam Al Maktoum refused to let her daughter become a forgotten name. Every year on March 18th, the anniversary of Latifah's disappearance, she made the same pilgrimage. She'd drive from Dubai to the empty quarter, guided by GPS coordinates the police had logged in 2016. The exact spot where Khalid claimed their vehicle broke down, where he said Latifah had walked away and never returned. Sheikha Mariam would arrive at dawn, before the heat became unbearable. She'd place fresh white roses in the sand, Latifah's favorite, and recite verses from the Quran. Sometimes she brought photos, Latifah as a child, laughing at the beach, Latifah at her university graduation, Latifah on her wedding day, radiant in cream silk. "The desert remembers everything, Habibti," she'd whisper to the wind. "And so do I." Local Bedouins who occasionally crossed her path spoke of the grieving mother with reverence. Some left their own offerings, stones arranged in patterns, small tokens of respect. One elderly man told her, "The sand shifts, Sheikha, but the truth stays buried only until Allah wills it revealed." She held on to those words like a lifeline. Back in Abu Dhabi, Khalid and Hessa watched the calendar with dread each March. They avoided the news, turned off their phones, pretended the anniversary didn't exist. But in 2023, 7 years after Latifah vanished, the desert finally answered Sheikha Mariam's prayers, and the silence shattered. March 2023. 7 years after Latifah Al Maktoum vanished into the desert's embrace. Two Finnish hikers, Magnus and Erika Lindström, had traveled to the UAE specifically to experience the legendary empty quarter. Armed with GPS devices, water supplies, and a guide's vague warnings about respecting the desert's power, they ventured into the dunes near Liwa Oasis, a stretch of sand so vast it seemed to exist outside of time itself. It was Erika who saw it first. "Magnus, wait." She stopped abruptly, her boot catching on something half-buried beneath a wind-carved ridge. At first glance, it looked like sun-bleached driftwood, perhaps the remains of a camel or desert fox claimed by the elements. But driftwood doesn't wear jewelry. Erika crouched down, her hand trembling as she brushed away layers of sand. The object caught the morning light, a bracelet, tarnished but unmistakable, its surface polished smooth by years of wind and grit. She tilted it toward the sun, squinting at the engraving barely visible beneath the patina. "Latifah, call someone," she whispered, her voice tight with horror. "Call the police, now." Within hours, the site transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off a 100-meter radius. Forensic teams in white suits worked methodically, brushing sand away with delicate precision, photographing every angle, every shadow. What they uncovered made seasoned investigators pause. Skeletal remains human, female, partially preserved by the desert's dry heat. The bones were arranged in a position that suggested she'd been buried deliberately, not scattered by wind or scavengers. And beside her, heartbreakingly small, were the fragile remains of a fetus approximately 20 weeks gestation, the coroner would later determine. A mother and her unborn child, entombed together beneath the sand for 7 years. The bracelet was bagged as evidence. Dental records were requested. DNA samples were rushed to labs in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. By evening, the confirmation came through official channels, though everyone already knew. Latifah Al Maktoum and her child. The news detonated across the UAE like a shockwave. Al Arabiya ran breaking coverage. Social media exploded with hashtags number Justice for Latifah, number Desert Betrayal. The story that had faded into tragic folklore was suddenly, horrifyingly real again. Sheikha Mariam collapsed when detectives delivered the news. Her 7 years of vigils, her mother's intuition that had never accepted the official narrative, vindicated in the cruelest possible way. "I knew," she sobbed, clutching a photo of her daughter. "I knew the desert was keeping her safe until the truth could speak." The old case file, dusty and stamped, "Closed presumed deceased," was pulled from archives and reassigned to major crimes. Detective Rashid Al-Mansouri, who had worked the original investigation, requested the case personally. Something had always bothered him about Khalid's story. The timeline, the convenient sandstorm, the husband who seemed too composed, too rehearsed. Now, with GPS technology more advanced than it had been in 2016, the team began reconstructing that fateful weekend. They pulled cell tower records, analyzed metadata from Khalid's phone, cross-referenced his movements with his sworn statements. And then they found it. Khalid's phone had pinged a tower near the burial site at 4:47 a.m. on March 19, 2016, more than 6 hours after he claimed to have left the area in a panic, searching for help. He'd stayed. Long enough to dig. Long enough to bury her. Long enough to cover his tracks. Or so he thought. The desert, as Sheikha Mariam had always said, remembers everything. And now, it was ready to testify. Detective Rashid Al-Mansouri had learned early in his career that murder investigations rarely hinged on a single piece of evidence. They unraveled thread by thread, each new discovery pulling at the fabric of a carefully constructed lie until the entire tapestry collapsed. Khalid al-Nuaimi's alibi was about to disintegrate. The financial forensics team started digging into Khalid's records, working backwards from 2016. What they found painted a damning picture of premeditation, so calculated it made seasoned investigators sick. December 2015, 3 months before the desert trip, Khalid had increased Latifah's life insurance policy from 2 million dirhams to 5 million. The application cited increased lifestyle expenses and future family planning. The insurance agent, when questioned, remembered Khalid's insistence that the policy include an extreme circumstances clause for presumed death. He asked very specific questions, the agent recalled, flipping through notes, about how quickly a payout could be processed if remains weren't found immediately. Then came the wire transfers. Between January and March 2016, Khalid had moved 780,000 dirhams in incremental amounts to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account holder, a shell company registered under Hessa al-Qasimi's passport number. But the most damning evidence came from a recovered email server. Khalid had used an encrypted email service he believed was untraceable. It wasn't. Digital forensic specialists cracked the account within 72 hours, revealing months of correspondence between Khalid and Hessa, messages that read less like love letters and more like criminal conspiracy. The 14th of February 2016. Khalid to Hessa. The baby changes everything. If she redraws her will, we lose access to everything. We need to act before it's too late. The 10th of March 2016. Hessa to Khalid. The desert is vast. People disappear there all the time. No one would question it. The 17th of March 2016. Khalid to Hessa. Tomorrow. Once she's gone, we'll finally be free. The emails were time-stamped, geotagged, and irrefutable. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you made it to this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here. Let's see who is still watching." If you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe, and share it with your loved ones to protect them from the same tragedy happening to them in the future. When detectives arrived at Hessa's Abu Dhabi residence on March 28, 2023, they found the villa empty, closets ransacked, drawers left open, a half-packed suitcase abandoned on the bed. She'd run. Border Patrol intercepted her Range Rover at the Hatta border crossing into Oman at 11:32 p.m. Hessa was alone, wearing sunglasses despite the darkness, her hands shaking on the steering wheel as officers approached. "I need to see my family in Muscat," she insisted, her voice brittle. "This is a personal trip." "Step out of the vehicle, Miss Al-Qasimi." In the interrogation room, Hessa lasted 4 hours before crumbling. She sat across from Detective Al-Mansouri, arms wrapped around herself, mascara streaking down her face. The confident woman who'd stood beside Khalid at memorials was gone. In her place sat someone hollowed out by guilt and terror. "He planned everything," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "Khalid said it would look like an accident, that no one would question it. I didn't think he'd actually—" "You knew he was going to kill her." Hessa's silence was answer enough. She described the burner phones, the rehearsed timeline, the way Khalid had staged the campsite to suggest Latifah wandered off disoriented, how he'd returned hours later, buried her while Hessa deleted their message history, how they'd celebrated their freedom with champagne that tasted like ash. "I loved him," Hessa sobbed. "I thought we deserved happiness. Latifah deserved to live," Al-Mansouri replied coldly. Khalid al-Nuaimi was arrested the following morning at his office in Dubai's Business Bay, a glass tower with views of the city he'd once commanded. Officers found him at his desk, reviewing contracts, his coffee still steaming. When they read him his rights, his face remained eerily calm, as if he'd been expecting this moment for 7 years. "I want my lawyer," was all he said. But as they led him out in handcuffs, past employees who stared in shock, past the marble lobby where his name was engraved on a bronze plaque, Khalid's mask finally slipped. His hands trembled. His breathing quickened. The man who'd convinced the world he was a grieving husband was now exposed for what he truly was. A murderer. And the desert had kept its promise. It had remembered everything. The Dubai courts of first instance had never seen a trial quite like this. By the time proceedings began in September 2023, the case had consumed the nation, every seat in the courtroom packed, journalists crowding the hallways, cameras positioned outside to capture each arrival. Sheikha Mariam sat in the front row, flanked by family members, her face a portrait of dignified grief. She wore white, the color of mourning, and clutched a framed photo of Latifah against her chest. Across the aisle, separated by security, sat Khalid al-Nuaimi. Gone was the designer suit and polished confidence. He wore a plain gray prison uniform, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. 7 years of guilt had carved lines into his features that no amount of charm could hide. Hessa had already accepted a plea deal, 20 years for conspiracy to commit murder, with possibility of parole after 15. She would testify against Khalid in exchange for leniency. When she took the stand, she couldn't meet Sheikha Mariam's eyes. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Lead prosecutor Fatima al-Daheri stood before the jury, her voice steady and unwavering. This was not a crime of passion. This was murder for profit, calculated, premeditated, and executed with chilling precision. On screens mounted throughout the courtroom, Evidence played in stark clarity. The insurance policy documents, Khalid's signature visible on the increased coverage forms, bank statements showing the offshore transfers to Hessa's shell company, GPS data mapping, Khalid's phone location, a damning digital footprint that placed him at the burial site for 6 hours. The recovered emails, "Once she's gone, we'll finally be free." Photos of the campsite, the yellow tent barely visible in archival footage. And finally, the most haunting image. Latifah's bracelet, sand-polished and engraved, resting beside a forensic reconstruction of where she was found. Khalid remained stoic throughout. He barely flinched as his lawyer attempted damage control, claiming circumstantial evidence and coerced testimony. But when surveillance footage played showing him toasting champagne with Hessa 6 weeks after Latifah's disappearance, several jurors visibly recoiled. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: premeditated murder, insurance fraud, conspiracy. When the judge handed down the sentence, life imprisonment without possibility of parole, Khalid's composure finally shattered. His head dropped, his shoulders shook, but he made no sound. Hessa, watching from a holding cell via video link, wept openly. Justice, cold and absolute, had been served. 3 months later, on a cool December morning, Sheikha Mariam stood beneath the date palms of Al Ain, where her ancestors had been laid to rest for generations. Latifah's remains, what the desert had preserved and finally returned, were interred in a simple grave marked with white marble. Verses from Surah Al-Fajr were engraved above her name. "O reassured soul, return to your Lord, well pleased and pleasing to him." Beside the headstone, Mariam placed her daughter's bracelet, now polished and gleaming as it had been the day Khalid gave it to her. Family and friends gathered in quiet prayer. The wind moved through the palm fronds, carrying with it the scent of earth and memory. It was the same wind that had swept across the empty quarter for 7 years, keeping Latifah's secret until the moment truth could no longer be denied. Mariam knelt at the grave, her hand pressed against the warm marble. "The desert buries many secrets, Habibti," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. "But it never keeps them forever." Above her, the palms swayed gently, and somewhere in the vast distance, the dunes shifted, eternal, patient, and finally, at peace. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to True Crime Journal HQ. Justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and remember, the truth always finds its way to light.